Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another version of Wealth is a Team Sport. For anyone that's new, just joining in, uh, one of the things I believe about money is I really think money is really just stored energy that creates us future options, things that we can do, because we just don't know what the world's going to bring for us. So saving money and planning today, while it can be a little unsexy and kind of boring, it's one of those things that lets you do all the cool things that are out there. So, because I believe in that whole person concept, I like to talk to really interesting people that are doing fun things in the world. So today we're going to be talking with Shelli Brunswick, and she is in space. She is an entrepreneur. She talks about personal growth. She's an author. She's all kinds of cool things. So let me just take a minute and welcome you to the show. Thanks for joining us, Shelli.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to talk about all of those things: space, technology, entrepreneurship. I even like talking about money. I have an MBA, as a matter of fact. You probably thought I was going to say I was a rocket scientist or a STEM professional, but I actually have an MBA and an undergraduate in business. So I love talking money. And if you're in the space business or want to be in the space business, we need all those financial managers as well and CFOs. So we've got a place for you in space.
That's really exciting. So just one of the things that I look at with money is there's kind of the three areas that you want to have: your protection, because you need to make sure you're taken care of, because you can't take care of all those people that you're responsible for if you're not being taken care of. And then, we want the savings, because that's what keeps you from being backed into a corner to make some kind of bad decision. And then you want to look at the growth, because that's the future is what it's all about. So I'm just interested, through your experience, obviously with space, how does that kind of tie in? Because I'm sure space is kind of all of those things. You have to have all those elements as you're going through.
Absolutely. Well, I'll talk about it on a personal level and just say, as a personal, having 4 chapters of my journey, starting right out of high school as an enlisted airman to where I am now, the CEO of SB Global. All along the way, I made financial plans and decisions to save money, invest money. And I think Warren Buffett said it best, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you're just one paycheck away from being in trouble. I think he said poor, but if you're investing money and you have passive income, so if you're an entrepreneur or you're thinking about entrepreneurship, it's really good not only to be active out there making money, but you got to think about what the passive ways of generating revenue for your company. Because one prime example is, think about COVID. When I worked at Space Foundation, we put on one of the world's largest space events. Guess what happened during COVID? That event went away.
Right.
What were the other ways to generate revenue in order to keep staff and stay employed and keep moving forward until COVID passed and we could have an event again? So both personal and professional, everyone on your audience should care about both passive and active income.
I love that. And that sounds so interesting. So talk about a little bit more about that. How did you go from being enlisted in the Air Force to being a CEO? That's just a fabulous journey. Give us a little bit of that.
Well, thank you so much. And again, I like to say I have those 4 chapters of that journey. My first chapter is, I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated high school. I did not have college money. And one of the best ways to earn college money was to enlist in the Air Force. So I joined the Air Force, thought I'd see the world, which was another goal. Was able to get my college money through the GI Bill, learned a profession. I was personnel, so I was human resources. I did that for 12 years. I went to school at night and on the weekends, earned my college degree. As we know, business, we already talked about that. And then I applied to become an officer in the Air Force, and I was selected to be an officer. I became a space acquisition officer, or space procurement. So that really started my space journey, completed my MBA during that time. And while I was an officer, I worked in program offices doing ground stations, rockets, satellites. I taught space acquisition or program management at Defense Acquisition University. I worked on Capitol Hill as a policymaker. And after 29 great years in the Air Force, I retired and I went to work and started that 3rd chapter as the Chief Operating Officer at Space Foundation, a U.S. nonprofit that, as I already mentioned, puts on one of the world-class space events called Space Symposium. And after 9 years, I decided, you know what? I really wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to be out there sharing how great space is. And I created SB Global so that I could be the bridge from the space industry to the general public. And that's why I'm with you today.
Well, I love that journey. And one of the things that I've always learned in my entrepreneurship journey is that regardless of what you do, communicators are the people that make money. And so Talk to me a little bit about that, because I know in the tech industry, I've worked with a lot of IT people, and I'm sure it's probably similar in space. Those aren't necessarily the people that are extroverts or like to communicate a lot. So how did you develop your communication skills? Because clearly you're a very accomplished speaker, communicator.
So I'm going to highlight that, yes, I'm one of those extroverts. So yes, a lot of the people I was in space acquisition in the military were introverts. They were those rocket scientists, engineers, um, individuals who needed to know that satellites work for telecommunications or GPS, for protection. One of the programs that they're looking at for the United States is now Golden Dome to protect the U.S. from incoming missiles. I think that ties back to the Reagan era of Star Wars, but really looking at how space was applied. And we had a team. Nobody does this alone. Nobody goes to space alone, and nobody creates space programs alone. So I was the program manager, and I worked with a wonderful team. I'd have engineers and logisticians and finance people, and we'd work together. But it was really important for me as a program manager to be able to listen and understand and get feedback and get people to talk and communicate and share. Because at the end of the day, for your program managers out there, it's all about cost, schedule, and performance. It's a nice triangle, and everything's a trade-off. And you have to figure out how you get from concept to execution and full implementation. And you need that team. And so I learned a lot of those communication skills in that job. Plus, I think naturally, I'm an entrepreneur. I did theater when I was in high school. I
Okay.
was one of those people that liked to be on stage. And then I learned that it was a really important skill, even when I was a professor at Defense Acquisition University, teaching about program management, because that can be kind of boring. People's
Right.
eyes start glazing over, they start falling asleep in your class. So how do you make it entertaining? And then when I went and worked on Capitol Hill, I took that same toolkit with me. How do I make this informative, but also make it fun? Not,
Right.
I think they call it edumatainment, so I'm going to educate you, but entertain you, because otherwise space can get really, and cyber, can get really, eye watering. So that was something I've learned throughout my 35-year career. And now we actually have a term called a science communicator or a space communicator. So in addition to all those other
Right.
things, I do like to say that I'm a storyteller or a space and science communicator.
I love that. And then you talked about teams, and in my finance, that's one of the things I really like to talk with people about. That ideally they can kind of get to the place where they're almost like the coach of their team, because with money, it's like everything in life. If you have enough time, you could become an expert at anything. But very few people, unless that's your profession, you're a doctor, you're a pilot, you're doing other things. It's good to have that team. And I find a lot in the financial world, there's a lot of people that feel like, well, I should be able to do this all by myself. And they struggle with this idea of like, I don't need a CPA. I just do my own taxes. And I'm like, of course you can, but why not work with the expert who keeps up to date on all the codes and does that? And your job is just to kind of be making sure that everything's moving and satisfying your needs for your family and what's going on. How do you explain that team concept to people? Because, and I know like smart people tend to go, they get used to that. I can do a lot of things myself. I'm like, you can, but then you reach that limit where you can only do the things you can keep in your head. And the team allows you to just expand your scope.
Absolutely. So when I worked at Space Foundation, we went from 45 people to 120 people. We expanded education programs. We did not only events, but the education programs. We had a discovery center. You can't do that alone. I mean, I loved being in all those places, but you
Right.
can't run everything. And a lot of times as leaders, we like to keep hats. We like to have this hat in marketing and this hat and this hat. And by the way, I am a person who likes to do my own taxes. So, but I love the numbers. I mean, I love actually running the numbers and playing
Yeah,
with the math. So, I think you understand what I mean by that.
I do.
So sometimes you got to do the things you like doing, if it makes you stay connected.
Mhm.
But even in the military, running a program as the program manager, maybe it's like being the quarterback of the football team, but you still need the tight end, you need the defensive, you need the center to hike you the ball. You got to have those defensive players protecting you so you can throw the ball and get it in the end zone. So good sports analogy there for your listeners who enjoy some good football on the weekends. My husband I just got to say, as a big football fan, life is good in our household. That football's back on. So I just dated our episode here that it's fall. So life is good in our household. So I'm going to give you the football analogies, but nobody's going to be able to run a program by themselves. I can't do the logistician. I can't do the supply chain management. So you have to, when you're an entrepreneur, you do what you're really good at, and then you find people who complement you. Obviously, I am not the person who wants to be looking at tech data. I can. I can do it. I just edited my next book coming out. I can do it, but it's not what I really want to do. And it's not where I excel. I'm a better CEO where I'm out there in the camera, or I'm meeting with the kids, or I'm interviewing people for my next book. That's my better skill set. That's my wheelhouse. And I think that's what leaders really need to think about. When you know yourself, it's all about that first step, self-leadership. Understand yourself, do your SWOT analysis, and then work with your team. And what are their strengths? And how do you capitalize on them? And how do you create a cohesive team that then can move down the field? And I'll give you a rowing analogy. We all want to be in the rowboat. Everybody may have gone fishing. It's really good if everybody's rowing together, not one person's rowing that way or another person's rowing this way.
Right.
And that's where the leader comes in. The leader's not in there rowing. The leader's in there helping the team so that we're all rowing together.
Oh, I love that. That's a great analogy. So now you're getting ready to actually publish your second book, but let's give us a little baseline of the first one, because it's 10 life lessons for personal growth. So how did you go from being space and in charge of everything to now you're an author writing this book? What was your inspiration, and what are you hoping to communicate with people?
Well, I just reflected on my journey. And while I was the chief operating officer at Space Foundation, I'd go out and speak, or I'd meet young people, or I'd be a mentor through various programs. One of the questions they'd always ask is, "Oh, do you have a book?" Well, you can't really write a book as a chief operating officer. I know some people hire ghostwriters, but just for anybody who's listening, yes, I did write this myself. And it being the first book, it was more challenging than the second book. I learned a lot. But I wrote down those lessons. There are 10 lessons in there. And then what I realized is my story's kind of boring. I'm happy to share it with you. But I went out and I interviewed over 200 global thought leaders. And then I included 3 thought leaders in each chapter. So not only do you get a little bit of my story, but you get 3 thought leaders from around the world. Maybe they're in space. Maybe they're not. I have one, the former president of Ecuador. I have the, space person, space agency leaders, former people who were astronauts or wanted to be astronauts, but never got their chance. So it gives a real good play of not only the US, but around the world. And it gives different scenarios about you can do this. And then I tie those lessons learned into the final section, but it's not a conclusion. It's actually called turning insights into action. It's just like if you and I were talking, I'd say, well, here's some things you could do next. You could look at this website. You could read this book. You could take this free program. And I do try to find things that are low cost or no cost so that people around the world can access them, or if they're online. So every chapter gives you the next steps you can take on your own, because not everybody can find a mentor or a coach. And so this was my way. As entrepreneurs all know, how do you scale? And you can only mentor 1 or 2 people a year. How can I scale that and pay it forward and do that knowledge transfer? And writing books and doing webinars was the best way to do that.
That's great. I love that. Can you talk a little bit about, in terms of entrepreneurship, the concept of leverage and other people's money? Because in my business, one of the things I really like showing people is, how do you give your dollar more than one job? Because you put money into a savings account, its only job is to be there. It probably earns little to no interest. And then when you spend it, it's gone. But there's things like real estate or owning a business or different types of life insurance where the money is working, but doing, like I say, just even in a 401k, it's got tax deferral, it's growing for the future. So anytime you can give a single dollar more than one job, you're helping yourself out. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And you talked about a number of assets. Some are more liquid than others. So it's always good to have an emergency account. And that's you have one of the things people like to do is ladder CDs. So maybe you do a CD a month and it's $1,000 or $100. And every month that matures and you renew it. And that's kind of your emergency money. So normally people should have 6 months to a year of emergency money. depending on your expenses.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then after that, you can really start expanding. So I do have all the portfolios you mentioned. I do have a rental properties, again, good, not as liquid. And they can have some, unexpected expenses,
Tennis.
flooding, tenant turnover. So your money in the bank in that CD is very safe, FDIC insured. And then as you leverage money and you take out a loan, like my rental has a loan, low interest rate, so nobody wants to get rid of those right now, so we can talk about that too. The borrowing money is always good when it's low, and then
Right.
leveraging it for more on your return. But the property goes up, and then you slowly can increase the rent, and someday if you needed to, you could live in it. So there's always a nice trade-off. So that's why they kind of say, you want your emergency fund, then do you have a 401k, because that's for your future. And if you start investing now, I'm sure you talk about in your shows the value of compounded interest.
Oh,
You
yeah.
invest, you always reinvest your dividends. Don't take those, have those reinvest, and you try never to touch that nest egg. Then you can have normal stocks, and you can have one of the people I love to watch is Jim Cramer on CNBC Mad Money, and he gives you some good stock recommendations. Like one of his favorite is Nvidia, own it, don't trade it, or Apple, own it, don't trade it. So you can buy stocks too, and then those again, they can be liquid. You could sell them if you needed, but they do go up and down in the market, and so you have to be prepared that there can be some ups and downs. And then obviously having rental properties, less liquid, but your opportunity to go higher, and you borrowed money at a lower interest rate. So I never want that loan to sunset. So that kind of gives you an idea. Oh, and buy your own house, because that's something you live in. And a lot of people, when they own versus rent, there's a trade-off you have to do, especially depending on interest rates. And this may not be exactly what you wanted to talk about today, but borrowing money to buy a home, a lot of people are having to realize, is it less expensive to rent or buy? And it's hard to buy right now because it's a tight market, although there are a lot more homes on the market than there have been 5 years ago. But the one nice thing about owning a home and having a mortgage, which means your bank owns the home, is you can live in that. And as long as you're making those payments, you have the place to live. You can't live in your stock portfolio.
Right.
So you, and the bigger thing is, and probably even, especially, I don't know what your demographic is for women versus men, but men seem to be a little more risky, and women seem to be more risk averse. But you know what Jim Cramer says? You only have to get rich once. So then it's only a matter of how much you want to have, no matter if you're a man or a woman. So what makes you comfortable? And you start working towards those goals. And again, I am not a certified financial planner, so I am not giving advice. Tara, I am only sharing a little bit about my personal strategy and what I've learned from, like I said, Jim Cramer and others.
That's great, because everybody, there's the basics you're all pretty familiar with, but what's interesting is to go, okay, here's all this advice, and then how does that apply to me very specifically? And then that's where the specific planning comes into play, and it gets interesting, because there's not a one size fits all. I wish there was. And that's always the hard thing with money, is people don't really share their failures. So you only hear about the successes. And so that's just, you got to understand that there's the whole situation going on out there. So talk a little bit more now. So you're getting ready you're going to be launching a series of books. So what's kind of your thought process with that?
Excellent. So I shared the first book is out, and the overarching series is called What Space Got to Do with It. And I take that, in 2022, I did a TEDx talk. And when I was working with my TEDx coach, I'm talking all this space stuff. He's not a space person. And he's like, I don't know what to call this TEDx. He goes, I know. What space got to do with it? So I just took that branding that he kind of came up on a whim, and I decided, well, let's just keep pulling that forward. Because a lot of times my goal, again, is to be the bridge from the space industry to the general public. The people in space already know. But you go talk to a non-space person, they're like, why are we going back to the moon? What does Mars have to do with it? Why are we doing this? What does space have to do with my daily life?
Right.
So I'm going to share with your audience right now, you and I are using telecommunications to do this broadcast. And all of telecommunications came from the Apollo era. It's how NASA was able to talk to the astronauts. And then that technology was commercialized, and now we get to benefit that every day. Think about what COVID would have been like had we not had telecommunications.
Well, and it's amazing, because I live out of town out in the country, because I have my horses out here, and we have Starlink, because we can't get nothing was good enough to do video.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't have to drive into my office in town just because I need video. I want to be able to do that from the comfort of my home.
Absolutely. And there are millions of people around the world who still don't have access to the internet because they're in island nations around the equator, and we can't lay fiber optic cable to connect them to the World Wide Web. So they still don't have weather forecasting, communications. The only way we can connect them and help elevate their standard of living and connect them to the global economy is through space technology.
Cool. So, Shelli, as we're getting towards the end of our conversation, what is probably like the biggest takeaway, or why would someone want to read your book? Like, what's in it for them?
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to say for the first book, this is really good for young professionals. Those people who are out there who are like, I'm not sure what I want to do next. How do I find my way? What's some good advice? This is really good for your young professionals, whether it's high school or college age, even into their 20s. 10 life lessons will give them a really good insight, especially if you can't find a mentor or role model. The second book coming out, which is called What Space Got to Do with It, An Interstellar Guide to Success, focuses on 4 things. How do you really accomplish your goals? And that's through leadership, awareness, access, and action. And so that can apply to anybody at any stage, whether you're a young professional, just starting your career, figuring it out, or maybe you're mid-career and you're thinking about transitioning into something different. I shared that I've had 4 different careers. I'm sure many of your audience will as well. And so that second book is really not only for young professionals, but for people who are looking to reinvent themselves. And then next year, I'll have the third book come out in the series, which is called Out of This World Leadership. And we'll talk about what it takes to be an out of this world leader.
Okay, I love that. So just go ahead and share with everybody, because I know you've mentioned it before we got started, that you do some keynote speaking and different types of speaking. If people want to get in touch with you for that, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Absolutely. So obviously, LinkedIn, if you're a young professional, get on LinkedIn, build out your profile. You can contact me on LinkedIn. I also have my shellibrunswick.com website, and you can reach me through that. And I do a number of motivational talks as well as workshops on the books, as well as space in our daily lives and opportunities in the space industry. So I look forward to connecting with your audience and seeing them around the galaxy.
Shelli, it's been just amazing talking with you, just to hear your journey from where you started to where you are now. And what I really am impressed by, or what inspires me, is that you're continuing to grow. So you've had your success, and now you're writing books, and now you're communicating, you're paying it forward, and you're doing all these really cool things. So thanks for letting us and in my community be part of that, and wish you the best success. And what else can we do to help support? I know I published a book a few years ago, and I know it's quite a process to go through and build that community of launching. Is there anything else that we can all do to help you?
Absolutely. Well, one of the big things, I'd love you to go check out the book. And even if you preview it and you like it, you can leave it a 5-star rating on Amazon. The other thing, in conjunction with the first book as well as the second book, there are free online videos for YouTube. So even if you can't afford to buy the book, you could go to YouTube and watch the videos. And that's always wonderful too, because the goal is, and the videos are with the thought leaders that are in the book. So it's not just you having to listen to me. You can listen to the former president of Ecuador, the chairman and CEO of the National Space Society. So they're all in those books. So you can get their advice. It's on YouTube for free. And then if you think you want to take it to the next level, you can go to Amazon, buy the book, and leave a 5-star rating. And I would be most appreciative.
That's excellent. So for everybody out there listening, check out the book, check out the YouTube, and get inspired. So Shelli, it's been so nice talking with you today, and I look forward to following your journey and seeing how well things go. And I know that we're connected, so it's excellent.
Absolutely. And for your audience, the sky is not the limit. There are no limits.
I love it. I love it. All right. Thank you very much. Desiree, if you want to wrap us up.